Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am Ghadi and this is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates and stories from West Asia. Today our top story is about the Israeli elections. Benjamin Netanyahu is set to return as Prime Minister of Israel. His party, Likud, won over 1 million votes. Now, if he returns to power, he's supposed to helm the most right-wing government in Israel's history. He would have to ally with the far-right politician Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, this is not good news for Palestinians. We bring you all the details in this report. Benjamin Netanyahu is set to become Israel's prime minister once again. His Likud party is the largest in Israel's parliament, the Knesset. His right-wing coalition is expected to finally get 64 seats. 61 seats are required to form the government. As the votes were being tallied, Netanyahu said this.
Today we have won a huge vote of confidence.
The results will be finalized by next week. President Isaac Herzog is expected to hear recommendations for the Prime Minister's post after the final results are in. But it isn't just Netanyahu's victory. Netanyahu is expected to lead the most right-wing government in Israel's history. His allies would be the Orthodox Shas Party, the United Torah Judaism Party, and the far-right Religious Zionism Bloc. Of these, the Religious Zionism Bloc will be the strongest after Likud. One of its most firebrand leaders is Itamar Ben-Gvir. In 2007, Ben-Gvir was convicted for racist incitement against Arabs. He has spoken about annexing the West Bank. He has called for the deportation of what he called disloyal citizens.
The public wants an absolute separation between those loyal to the State of Israel, and we have no problem with them, and those who undermine our dear country.
Ben-Gvir is expected to demand the Public Security Ministry. During his campaign, he said he would push for immunity for security officials. He also promised to ease Israel Defense Forces' live fire directives. His rise and the rise of the far right has Palestinians worried for their future.
This election is as we expected. The parties that are more right-winged and more extreme are the ones winning in this election. Therefore, we understand that the right wing is more extreme and is the one leading. Their policies eliminate any political potential, and that will lead to more escalation of aggression and crimes against Palestinian people.
Hamas also lamented the rise of Israel's right wing. The group called for Palestinian unity going forward.
The results of the Israeli elections confirm the increasing presence of the extreme right wing in the Zionist scene. This is an indicator that we are confronting an escalation of aggression against our people and our sanctities by any future government. The Knesset has become more right-winged, more extreme and more racist. This will affect the whole region.
Incumbent Prime Minister Yair Lapid's party is the second largest in the Knesset. He is expected to take over as leader of the opposition. But it is unlikely that he will be able to oust Netanyahu from power like he did in 2021. Lapid differed from Netanyahu on some issues. We'll start with Ukraine.
The head of Islamic Jihad.
Lapid said he would not send Kiev missiles. Netanyahu has said he will look into it. Netanyahu also expects that he may be called to act as mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Now, what about issues closer to home? Israel recently concluded a historic maritime deal with Lebanon, a deal that Netanyahu panned. He called it against Israel's interests. He may drop the border agreement. However, Lebanon has said that it is not likely. Since the US brokered the deal, Lebanon is confident it will stay in place. Then there's Iran. Netanyahu has always considered it an enemy state, and that's one view he and Lapid do not diverge on. And what about Palestinians? Will Lapid's declaration of support for the two-state solution be forgotten? Probably. Netanyahu has himself, on occasion, said he supports the solution. But he did not act on this during his past stint in power. Also, his right-wing allies are likely to block any move towards a separate Palestine. So, considering these factors, Netanyahu's return may mean stability for Israel, but the rise of tensions in West Asia. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One. From Iran, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and much more, we have a lot lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, let's take a quick look at what's making the headlines across the region.
A spokesperson for new UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said that the UK embassy in Israel would not be moving to Jerusalem. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss had ordered a review of the embassy's location when she was in power. A member of Israel's Knesset from the far-right religious Zionism bloc has said they plan to legally abolish an annual Pride parade in Jerusalem. The bloc is the third largest group in the Knesset after the latest polls. The Human Rights Watch has released a report saying that Bahrain is using its political isolation laws to keep opposition lawmakers from running for public office or even serving on the boards of civic organizations. Pope Francis is on his first official visit to Bahrain. After arriving at the royal palace, the Pope called for an end to human rights violations. This is the Pope's second visit to a Gulf nation after his 2019 trip to Abu Dhabi. Qatar has announced that football fans without tickets can enter the country after the World Cup's group stages conclude on the 2nd of December. Fans will still need to apply for a hire card to enter the country and football stadiums. Jordan and Russia have agreed to step up coordination in tackling instability in southern Syria. Jordan blames the instability on Iran-linked militias and multi-billion-dollar drug smuggling operations across its borders.
And now to Tehran. In Iran, protests sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini are still ongoing, and this is despite an ultimatum issued by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. In our next report, we tell you what's been happening recently in Iran. Let's take a look.
The protests in Iran against the death of Mahsa Amini continue. It's been about 50 days since they began. They have turned from anti-hijab to anti-regime protests. The defiance has taken Iranian authorities aback. They have tried different tactics to end the protests. Iran has blamed the US and Israel for inciting the protests.
Do not think that Biden must call you and tell you to take to the streets, or Dempsey, or McKinsey, or Benny Gantz, or Naftali Bennett, or Lapid for that matter, or Bin Salman, who diced up the corpse of that journalist and dissolved it in acid. These people will not call you directly. They will use their media to force you to stand against your people and society and fighters. Mr. Biden, we forced you out of Iran and the region. We will bury your dreams in this nation.
They have said the protesters are collaborating with enemy states, but that hasn't stopped the people. Iran has attacked its minorities. Mahsa Amini was Kurdish. Iran's Kurdistan region has been facing brutal repression. The 40th day after Amini's death, a vast crowd gathered at the cemetery where she was buried. Almost 10,000 people were present. But police clashed with mourners at the cemetery. Witnesses say they opened fire at mourners in Amini's hometown of Saqqez. And Kurdish people outside Iran have been targeted too. Iran has attacked the Kurdistan region in Iraq, but this has not deterred the protesters either. The regime then tried to bring the nation together. On the same day, the crowds gathered at Amini's grave. An attack took place in the southern town of Shira. A gunman killed 15 people at a shrine in the city. ISIS took responsibility for the attack. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, called for unity. He said the perpetrators would be punished. Despite his calls, Iran's protesters did not get behind the regime. Then came the ultimatum. The leader of Iran's Revolutionary Guard said enough was enough.
Put aside the wickedness. Today is the last day of the riots. Do not come to the streets anymore. What more do you want from the lives of these people?
But the people defied his demand for the protests to end. The day after the ultimatum, university students continued to burn their hijabs. They continued their chants against Khamenei. In Tehran, university students clashed against pro-regime groups. Then there's the cruelty. The UN reports that Iran is not returning the bodies of dead protesters to their families.
We've seen a lot of ill treatment, continued ill treatment of protesters, but also harassment of the families of protesters. Colleagues have flagged the following. I'll read it out to you. Of particular concern is information that authorities have been moving injured protesters from hospitals to detention facilities, refused to release the bodies of those killed to their families, and delivered the deceased on the condition that their families do not hold a funeral or that their families do not speak to the media.
The entire law enforcement machinery is against the protesters. Iran is to hold public trials for over 1,000 protesters. This is after 315 have already been charged in Tehran. Reports say the judiciary is bound to side with the regime. All the protesters are expected to face imprisonment. But despite the crackdown, people are still gathering. Reports say Iran's youth is rebelling against the all-powerful clergy. Videos where protesters knock off clerics' turbans have gone viral. The protests began because of Iran's morality police trying to enforce the hijab. Now they have escalated to a fight against the clergy's hold on power. Iran continues to do everything it can to crush the demonstrations. However, despite its best efforts, the regime has not succeeded yet.
Now, even as Iran grapples with the protests, Saudi Arabia says an Iranian attack is imminent. The kingdom told the United States that Iran will attack Saudi oil facilities. Now, the United States said it will protect its partner Saudi Arabia, and this is despite the recent tensions between the two nations. We tell you more.
It looked like relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States were at an all-time low. US senators were calling for a re-examination of the relationship. But then, Saudi Arabia told the US that Iran may be planning attacks against its oil facilities. And despite the tensions, Washington has said it will protect Riyadh. Saudi Arabia shared intelligence with the US about an imminent Iranian attack. Riyadh believes Tehran will attack its oil production facilities. It also says Iran is planning to attack Erbil in Iraq's Kurdistan. The US thinks it's a credible threat. Reports suggest the attacks could be Iran's way of distracting its citizens who have been protesting against the regime for weeks. Iran has already fired missiles at Iraq's Kurdistan region. When asked about Saudi Arabia's warnings, this is what the US had to say.
We are concerned about the threat picture. We are in constant contact through military, diplomatic, intelligence channels with the Saudis, and we won't hesitate to act in defense of our interests and our partners in the region.
Oil is the reason for the latest flare-up between the two. The US was furious after Saudi-led OPEC decided to cut oil production. For weeks, the Gulf states have been justifying the decision as purely economic. But the cut comes just before the US midterm elections. The Biden administration needs oil prices as low as possible. Reports say Biden visited Saudi Arabia in July and was keen to keep oil production stable. It seems where fist-bump diplomacy failed, the fear of Iran may have succeeded. The US is on high alert. Both Washington and Riyadh had blamed Iran for drone strikes on Saudi oil facilities in 2019. The attack halved the kingdom's oil production and caused fuel prices to surge. Tehran denied the allegations. But the drones seen attacking Saudi facilities in 2019 are reportedly the same as the ones being used by Russia in Ukraine. Iran, of course, has denied supplying drones to Russia as well. On Saudi Arabia's southern border lies Yemen. Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have attacked Saudi oil facilities in the past too. The truce in Yemen expired last month. The fighting has resumed. As things stand, it may be prudent for Saudi Arabia to ask for US support, and the Biden administration would welcome stability in the oil markets. And so, both nations seem to have put aside their differences as they prepare to face Iran once more. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
And now to the country I'm currently standing in, to Lebanon. Lebanon has entered a power vacuum once again. On Sunday, President Michel Aoun's term ended without a successor. Now the country is being governed by a caretaker cabinet. We tell you more about the situation in this report.
Lebanon is without a president. Michel Aoun left the presidential palace on Sunday with no successor. On Thursday, the parliament decided it will try to elect a president again on November 10th. There have already been 4 failed attempts to choose Aoun's successor. The last attempt was on October 24th. This isn't the first time that Lebanon has been without a president. Aoun himself took charge in 2016 after a vacuum of 29 months. The country's system requires the joining of hands between multiple parties to elect a president. Lebanon's 128-member parliament is evenly divided between Christian and Muslim sects. The presidency is reserved for a Christian. Thus, parliamentarians from multiple blocs have to come together to elect a president. However, the last 4 attempts have failed to bring forth a consensus candidate. In previous presidential vacuums, Lebanon's cabinet took on the president's powers by taking decisions unanimously. What makes Lebanon's present situation even more difficult this time is the lack of a working cabinet. When leaving his post, Aoun made this statement.
This morning, I sent a letter to the parliament using my constitutional authority and signed a decree deeming the government to have resigned.
When Parliament met on Thursday, they reaffirmed the cabinet's caretaker status. Parliament said the cabinet can only convene in extraordinary cases. But why is there a caretaker cabinet? It's because Lebanon has not had a working government since the elections in May. After the elections, Aoun nominated Prime Minister Najib Mikati to return as Premier. However, he did not approve Mikati's cabinet lineups over the last 6 months. In the past, Lebanon has been without a president or a working cabinet. This time, it is without both. Lebanon's president is responsible for signing bills into law. appointing the Prime Minister and approving the cabinet formation. The cabinet is responsible for making executive decisions. Without both, the question is, how will Lebanon deal with its worsening financial crisis? The crisis has been ongoing since 2019. Estimates say that it has impoverished more than 80% of the population. Economic and political turmoil has sunk the value of the Lebanese currency by over 90%. Lebanese citizens have been frozen out of their bank deposits. Lebanon reached a draft deal with the IMF in May to unlock financial aid, but the Deputy Prime Minister, Saadeh Chami, has said that he is unsure if the final deal would require a president's approval. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Whatever the diplomatic situation is between Saudi Arabia and the United States, American cultural influences made their way to the kingdom. Now, recently, Riyadh officially celebrated the festival of Halloween on October 29. Take a look at how it went. That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, coming to you from the streets of Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.
Reading between the...
This week on the West Asia Post, Netanyahu set to return to power in Israel. Iranians defy protest ultimatum despite crackdown. Saudi Arabia warns the US of an imminent Iranian attack. Lebanon sees another power vacuum. Also on the show this week, Halloween makes its way to Saudi Arabia. Watch the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, every Friday at these times, only on WION World is One.